familiar with the 2% statistic that out of all the partners at big law firms in the US, less than 2% are Black. How were you able to be like in that 2%? Like, do you think that there were some things that just made you stand out, that unwritten corporate America rules or big law rules that people just don't know about?
In order to be successful in high school and college and law school, I had a very similar approach, which was put your head down, work your tail off, do really good work. And if you do that, the results will be positive. It was a surprise and unexpected to get into a law firm environment, apply that same system and not get anywhere. I really struggled to get senior attorneys to pay attention to me. This was more after I'd moved back to the States. After I'd moved back to the States and I was working in kind of more New York style firms, I struggled a lot to try to get folks' attention. But I would see, those same attorneys going into my peers next door to me on either side and going in and sitting and kind of going through documents. And that was really disheartening. I changed my approach in a way that has been hugely beneficial to me and in the way that I speak to mentees about all the time, which is it's table stakes that you have to do good work in a law firm in order for you to progress. It is necessary, but it is far from sufficient. Your ability to build relationships internally with your colleagues and your ability to deepen relationships with folks who you meet outside of work, that is how you are going to actually successfully ascend within the law firm environment.
Hey, my name is Imade. Welcome to the channel. This is We Made It in America. Here we talk to immigrants who come from all over the world and build incredible success here in the United States. If you want to join, please subscribe, like, comment, share, and just be part of the conversation. Let's dive in.
Hi, our guest today on this episode is Gabriel Dabiri. Gabriel is a distinguished finance attorney. He's most recently served as the office managing partner at Polsinelli, one of the largest law firms in the US. And before that, he worked in several top law firms like Linklaters and White and Case, and he attended the University of Pennsylvania in the US, Cardiff University in the UK. He's also deeply involved in community work. He's been on the boards of several charities, nonprofits like Women's First International and the Black Law Pipeline. So thank you so much, Gabriel, for being here with us. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Let's start at the beginning of your journey. Your parents moved here in the 70s to Toledo, Ohio. So that makes you a second generation immigrant. So what does that mean for you to be a second gen American? And how did growing up in that Nigerian-American household influence you, your identity, your ambition?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Well, I think it influenced me in every way imaginable insofar as coming to a homogenous environment. Toledo, Ohio, where I grew up, is predominantly white. The high school I went to was a small, very predominantly white Baptist high school in Toledo, Ohio. So it wouldn't have been particularly easy for me to feel like I fit in the environment that I was in. And then my parents were, they didn't have the easiest lives before they came to the States, and then they struggled in a different way when they got to the States. And education, though, was really important to them, discipline. And in many ways, I feel like myself, my brother, and my sister who grew up in the States, we got the best of both worlds insofar as my mom was very much a dreamer, always reminded us that we could do anything, and we had that pounded into our brains from the point that we were very, very young. And then my dad was kind of the strict disciplinarian, and the only thing that matters is hard work. I think for both of them, they shared the mentality that it doesn't matter how smart you are, how talented you are. You will get to where you ultimately will go by how hard you work. I remember, for example, my brother, who's a renowned scientist and who's won a lot of awards because of his intellect. We had our IQ scores growing up, and our parents refused to share them with us because they said nothing good could come out of it. If the scores are high, then they didn't want us thinking that we can coast. If the scores are low, they didn't want us to
feel defeated.
Yeah, exactly. So I have no idea. My brother has no idea. But one of the things that we did focus on, and our parents really reinforced this, is always to be the hardest working person in the room. And so I've taken that ethos with me really throughout my life.
You then studied economics and political science at UPenn, but then you went to Cardiff University in the UK after that for law school. So why did you go to the UK? Why didn't you just take the traditional JD American Law School route?
Yeah, that was actually out of necessity. So I graduated UPenn with significant debt, like a lot of American students do.
Yeah.
Wasn't quite sure if I wanted to go immediately to law school or not, or if I even wanted to go to law school. So I got a paralegal job at Skadden. That's my first job out of school with their M&A department. Determined, okay, this work isn't awesome, but I really enjoy the deals that we're doing, and I'm really impressed by the lawyers I'm surrounded by. They're also intelligent, different backgrounds. I definitely want to pursue law. So then the next question became, how do I go about pursuing that, given how, I would have had to take out another $170,000 in loans for over 3 years to go to law school in the States. So I was visiting family in the UK and lamenting my situation, really want to go to law school, don't want to take out all these loans, I don't know what to do. And they were the ones who suggested you should consider going to law school in the UK. If you go to kind of a 3-year LLB program, so not law and French or law and politics, you can immediately sit the bar exam in either New York or California. You don't have to do an LLM, and you do the whole thing at a fraction of the cost. So I'm like, never heard of that as a route before. I didn't know anybody who had gone that route before either. So I just kind of rolled the dice and did it that way. So my first year was, I think, 8,000 or 8,500 pounds all in, which back then the equivalent was $15,000. I was on merit scholarships for my grades the next 2 years. So I actually paid off my law school loans way before my undergraduate loans, when it's usually the other way around. Once I was there, the plan was to do 3 years and then immediately come back and sit the bar exam and then practice, hopefully in New York, because I was already living in New York. That's where I knew I wanted to base my career. But in my 20s, I was there with my fiance at the time, now wife. She came to visit her family, members of her family who live in the, we were getting to travel, because once you're over there, it's easy to get through Europe very cheaply, even as a broke student as I was at the time. So we thought, what's the rush? Why are we rushing back? So instead I got a job with an international firm, which is one of the best decisions I ever made in my career. Linklaters at the time, which is a phenomenal firm. I was in London for a period of time. I did a secondment in their Singapore office doing debt capital markets work, and then back to London, and then eventually finished off my career back in New York. My entire career is, I think, enriched by having gone a non-traditional route. When, if I'd gone straight through, I'm sure things would have been fine, but I just think I've had a more eclectic and fascinating experience, at least for me, by virtue of, it was out of necessity, just because I felt like I couldn't afford. I didn't want to take out the loans to go to law school in the States.
When you say that it was the best decision you made in your career, what about it helped you in your career the most?
I'm dual qualified. I'm an English law solicitor as well as being a New York qualified attorney. Between those two jurisdictions, within a transactional practice, it actually covers a good portion of the entire globe when it comes to finance transactions. A lot of the deals that are done out of Asia and certainly Singapore are under English law. A lot of transactions out of Africa are done under English law. And then obviously New York law is a kind of jurisdiction of choice for many international transactions as well. So that's been really beneficial to me. There aren't a ton of folks who have both of those qualifications as well. And so that's been a value to me. And you mentioned before we got on that I'm shifting firms, and I am. And I think one of the things that was attractive to the firm I'm joining is the fact that I did have that qualification and experience working in multiple jurisdictions. Who knows whether I would be making this specific move, but for the fact that I had that experience and training and education kind of on transatlantically.
That's a really good point. It makes sense when you explain like that in the long term. You probably weren't thinking about it that way, but you just make an advantage of what you find yourself doing.
That's right.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And skipping ahead a bit in your career to when you started at Polsinelli in 2018, you came in from a non-partner role to then being a partner in Shareholder at Polsinelli. And then 2 years later, you were the sole practice head of their private credit practice. A year after that, office managing partner. How did you rise so fast, like in a new firm? What was that shift like, going from an employee at one firm and then moving to shareholder at another firm? What was that shift like for you in your career, but also in what you had to start doing and how you had to start thinking?
Yeah, you've really done your homework before. Why did I ascend the way that I did? You would probably have to ask the people who continue to
Ah,
promote me while I was over there. I can give a few guesses. I describe myself as an irrationally ambitious person. So I aim just very high, and that goes back to the upbringing that we talked about at the very beginning of this conversation. I think one of the things that the greatest gift that my parents gave me is I don't think any of us have a limit in our minds as to what we're capable of doing. And so we aim higher than what other people think is reasonable when it comes to a lot of things. And many times it's not so crazy when you kind of achieve those goals along the way. I was hired at Polsinelli to build a private credit practice. They have a very robust finance practice, but they didn't have private credit specifically. And the hope was that I would come over and help build that practice. My experience in some big law firms is that there is particular way to exist in that environment in a way that will be received well by those in leadership, which tends to lead to, at least for me, the feeling that you could not be kind of a nice, normal, kind human being in that environment and still ascend in the way that I would hope to. What I loved about my experience at Polsinelli specifically is I felt like I could bring my whole self and be a kind person, collaborative, and I was being recognized for it and promoted for it. And it was the kind of leadership that they encouraged there. And so having the balance on the one side of being this kind of type A, really ambitious person on the one hand, but on the other hand, hopefully being seen as someone who is empathetic, valued people no matter what level they are. I'm always very quick to spotlight those who've done well rather than trying to take that glory for myself as often as I can. Those might have been among the qualities that they thought, okay, this could be a good person to, run our office, grow the office. And so I took on that role and I threw myself fully into it like I do everything. And with irrational ambitions for what was possible in the office. Even today, I think is an underrated firm. It's a fantastic firm. But I had never heard about it before they reached out to me. I actually refused to take the interview a couple of times because I had never heard of it. Then I got there and I took the interview and I met the folks there and I learned more about the firm and I started thinking this place is amazing. I don't know why people haven't heard about it. I don't know why I haven't heard about it. And because I felt like the firm had a compelling story to tell, it was just a matter of telling that story to the market. And I was very confident that it would be well received. And so that was the attitude that I assumed the role. A lot of the decisions that were made in the office were deliberately not top down, but more me soliciting guidance and feedback from those in the office, no matter what level they were. I don't care if they're the janitors or the biggest rainmaking equity partner in the office. Everybody needs to be functioning at a high level in order for the office to function at the highest level that it can. And the views that I got from folks in the office were how the office was led. And I also found that everybody was more engaged in the direction we were going. So from my perspective, I had kind of a general sense of I wanted to make this like any other full service top tier firm in New York. That was the overarching goal. Now, how we get there, you can take a lot of different routes to get there. I chose to allow the folks in the office to tell me what the best way was for us to do that. I couldn't take all the ideas, but I was able to take most. And because that was the process that I took, people were more willing to buy into it and work together, even if it was inconvenient at times. And I have a lot of examples of that because they weren't just being told, okay, this is what you're doing without any sort of solicitation of, feedback as to whether it would be a good idea. Well, we're proceeding on with your ideas. So you really don't have an excuse to move forward because this is what you said would get you to come back into the office, or this is what you had said you think would be effective in getting the word out in New York. Everybody was kind of working together and the results speak for themselves. I mean, the headcount grew significantly, revenue grew significantly. And I do think it was a real team effort from everyone in the office rather than that coming from me.
What you said was really interesting because a lot of times, and not just in law, generally professional services, you get training on the technical bits, the actual content of the work and servicing the clients, or maybe not on a lot of the things you're mentioning, business development, teamwork, management. So for you, having seen different phases of that in your own career, you come from trainee, solicitor, associate, partner, firm leadership, what were the necessary shifts in that mindset that you needed to have, that lawyers need to have?
Yeah.
How were you able to do that?
Yeah, and I love that question, and it's kind of a rephrasing of a question you asked earlier in terms of coming in as a senior associate, and then all of a sudden I'm
Yeah,
operating as an
yeah.
owner. It's a similar type of question, and I don't think that it's one that a lot of firms handle very well, right? I think in most cases, those in leadership positions at law firms are those who developed big books of business. The problem is the skill set that's required to develop a big book of business is not at all the same as the skill set that's required to manage. It's a very different skill set. When I started assuming these leadership roles, I tried to read a lot, and so to prepare myself to for the next step. One of the things I just learned from the books I read and the studies that were kind of set out in the books is the importance of understanding that, what got me here won't get me there, right? There's
Yeah.
certain skills and attributes and that, got me to a point where I was able to develop business as a senior associate were very different from the skills that I would need to deploy now that I'm running a team or now that I'm running an office, right? And so I did pivot my approach in that regard. And I mean, I probably could spend a whole other couple of hours in talking about the various ways that I did change to try to be more effective as a manager versus just just an employee kind of servicing clients. But I think it was important that I did make that shift because in my personal view, it made me a lot more effective as a leader. Deploying a different skill set than what's required to kind of grow a book of business.
Right. So you really had to take ownership of that yourself for developing that extra skill set that's not
Yeah,
really taught.
taking
Yeah.
steps to do it. I mean, I have kind of a personal board of directors, more senior
Oh,
attorneys who I really respect, who I'll reach out to for guidance. I did read a lot as I was
mhm.
getting these new roles to try to figure out what would work, what wouldn't work, and just to have a sense of what people who are smarter about these things than me have to say about it based on their own experience and try
Right.
to learn to avoid as many mistakes as I can. Now, you're not going to avoid all mistakes. And what I needed to do specifically within my firm with the specific personalities that I was dealing with is going to be different from what other people's experiences are. But that doesn't mean that their experiences are totally irrelevant to mine. They're very relevant. And there's some broad themes that I think I was able to take from others' experiences that helped me.
Moving on now to current day, which is you've recently announced that you're moving on from Polsinelli and now you're going to be starting as Global Head of Private Credit at Squire Patton Boggs. Having accomplished this much so far, what do you hope for in the next phase of your career?
Yeah, I mean, this new role is super exciting for me for a host of reasons. My background is very international. My training has been very international. Firms I've worked for, leading up to Polsinelli had all been very international. And I was having some success building a kind of a cross-border finance platform at Polsinelli. I did in the end determine I could be more effective just plugging my expertise onto an existing global platform. One of the things that I came to learn about myself at Polsinelli is how much I enjoy the process of building, right? And I got to build on this phenomenal national platform. We saw some success in me doing that. The opportunity now to build globally, nationally, is just super exciting for me. So again, I'm going in with kind of irrationally high ambitions, some of which I'll keep to myself. And I don't have any limits in my mind as to what I am capable of and what the firm is capable of working together to build out kind of a top tier global private credit and direct lending practice. I'm hoping that I can bring the experience that I had coming into a firm that was growing a reputation in New York, but didn't have kind of the reputation it does now in New York, and doing that, again, you're working alongside folks who have already done a great job building a brand in New York. Hopefully, I can also add to what they've already kind of started in that regard. And
Right.
then we'll just see what happens after that. I mean, a lot of this is going in, try to be as prepared as you can, work your tail off, and then you just see where the results end up. But it's been a formula that's worked well for me in the past, and we'll just see what happens in this new role. But I'm super excited for it.
Awesome. I'm excited to see where that takes you. came across some statistics like that you're definitely familiar with, like the 2% statistic that out of all the partners at big law firms in the US, less than 2% are Blacks. But
Yeah.
for yourself, and being someone that's known for mentoring young Black lawyers and promoting diversity, how were you able to be like in that 2%? Like, do you think that there were some things that just made you stand out, that are like unwritten corporate America rules or big law rules that people just don't know about?
Yeah. So, backing up a little bit, in order to be successful in high school and college and law school, I had a very similar approach, which was put your head down, work your tail off, do really good work. And if you do that, the results will be positive. It was a surprise and unexpected to get into a law firm environment, apply that same system and not get anywhere. I felt like I was spinning my wheels. I really struggled to get senior attorneys to pay attention to me. This was more after I moved back to the States. My first firm experience was phenomenal, but after I moved back to the States and I was working in kind of more New York style firms, I struggled a lot to try to get folks' attention. But I would see those same attorneys going into my peers next door to me on either side and going in and sitting and kind of going through documents. And that was really disheartening. I went to a program called CYOC, Chart Your Own Course. It's led by Wharton Bellamy. I was a third-year associate at the time, and it was eye-opening in a lot of different ways. One, it was the first time I had been in a room with hundreds of attorneys, and all of them were Black and brown, and I had never seen that before. So just that was like, wow, there are a lot of us around here. You go into these firms, and you're usually the only or one of like a small handful. So to go to a place where all of them kind of looked like you was, impactful, certainly for me. And then there was a lot of conversation at that conference in terms of the value of relationships and building relationships and how critical that is to your success in the law firm environment. And on the back of that conference, I changed my approach in a way that has been hugely beneficial to me and in the way that I speak to mentees about all the time, whether they're folks of color or gender-wise or otherwise, which is it's table stakes that you have to do good work in the law firm in order for you to progress. But it is necessary, but it is far from sufficient. Your ability to build relationships internally with your colleagues and your ability to build deepen relationships with folks who you meet outside of work, that is how you are going to actually successfully ascend within the law firm environment. So all of a sudden, I'm making time for my peer associates to get a drink, to get lunch, not necessarily to even talk about work, but just to get to know them and have them get a chance to know me. I think that's even more. And then I would do the same for the people who are reported to, like as a junior associate with senior associates, with partners, finding occasions where we could go outside the office so that we can get to know one another. Not everyone is going to be receptive, but I think a lot of times people would be surprised at how receptive people will be to that sort of thing. And I think as minorities in these environments, where you don't have as many people who look like you in these environments, I think the common tendency is for senior folks to want to spend time with people who they feel comfortable with, and that tends to be people who look like them or come from a similar background. So as hard as it may be, the onus is on us to, this is how I feel, to reach out. Right.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, you're not relating to me as a demographic anymore. You're relating to me as me. And I'm not relating to you as a demographic anymore. I'm relating to you as you. And then all of a sudden, you're doing work. And if there is the inevitable error that we hate as lawyers, but exists in work from time to time, well, you're given the benefit of the doubt that you're typically not given otherwise. Right. There is that famous study where, it was a blind study. They would submit work, and the person who was reviewing the work was told, candidate person A had done the work product and they were white, and person B had done the work product and they were Black, right? The same work, but when they formulated the results, the scores came back consistently lower for the person who was told this is a Black person who did your work versus someone who was white who had done the work, even though the work was exactly the same, right? So there are clearly biases there that existed, that they may not have themselves been aware of, but kind of on study with lots of people who are submitting their work, there's difference there. And so it's clear that the biases exist. They just do. And they exist for everybody. I'm not immune to them either, right? In my view, the best way to counteract that is for people to just get to know me. and for me to get to know them. And so I work very, very hard. I make sure that T's are crossed and I's are dotted with my work, but I am also devoting probably equal measure of time getting to know the people who I work with. And then people outside of work. And between that was when I started seeing my career kind of take a different course. And so I preach it I have a lot of mentees, both within and outside of my firms. And I teach them the value of that as well, which is don't just go in and think you can put your head down and you're going to end up a partner 8 years, 10 years, 12 years later, right?
Right.
It's really important for you to also devote time to build relationships both inside and outside of your organization.
Do you have any mentees who are introverts? I mean, I'm an introvert, so I get it. And I get that there are different ways and strategies and things like that. But also, it does kind of penalize that kind of person who is not the, get up and move around and talk to everyone, social
Yeah.
butterfly kind of
Yeah.
person. Yeah.
Yeah, my personal view is that business development will not be effective for you unless you feel comfortable in your own skin in the way that you're going about it. And so the way that an introvert will go and develop business is necessarily going to be different from someone who's really extroverted and, doesn't mind going to a conference and walking up to a group of 3 people and just introducing themselves. For an introvert, like death, warmed up. Even introverts have friends. I imagine if you consider yourself an introvert, you have friends. You have like a network of people. So those are the folks that you really should be focusing on in terms of keeping those relationships fresh and seeing how you can transition those relationships into kind of business opportunities. Not in a transactional way, because I'm the sort of person where if I feel like I'm selling to you, I'm going to feel uncomfortable. So
Yes.
what I do instead is, when I'm speaking to folks, a lot of people, they have 2 favorite topics. One is themselves and the other is work. And so for a lot of the relationships I have, I do focus on who they are, first and foremost, getting to learn who they are. Naturally, conversations will go to work. And then a lot of people, a third pastime is complaining about aspects of the work. And that's when you kind of have an opportunity. You should really be listening in those circumstances as to, how is that person being assessed at work? What are their frustrations? What difficulties are their organizations dealing with at the time? All of those little breadcrumbs are leading you directly to your opportunity to help them out, right? Because if you are identifying a need that a person has within their organization, if you are in a position to help them satisfy that need, you're no longer selling. You're doing them a favor, right?
Right.
They
Yeah.
have a problem. You're there to help them solve that problem. I've got a partner at my firm who could have a conversation with you about that. You're not selling anymore. You're doing them a favor. Like I have this person has a problem. You are offering them a solution. You're no longer selling, even though you are selling, but it doesn't feel like that anymore. You're actually doing the other person a favor. That is really how my book has developed. It has been a series of occasions where people who I know, and a lot of them, have been dealing with an issue, whether it's rates or an outside law firm that's not responsive, which blows my mind. I don't understand why that even exists. Just because for me, I feel like I would not be able to keep a client. In my head, I feel like I would not be able to keep a client if I'm not being responsive to the needs that they have. Yet there are big name firms out there that are going like several days without replying to a client's email. And I'm like, why are they still your outside counsel? Right. So that's like an aside, but in either case, the moment as an introverted person, if you're having a conversation with someone who you do feel comfortable with and you're able to lead the conversation to a need that they're able to satisfy, then that is a client opportunity for you too. And you don't have to write thought pieces. You don't need to go to these conferences. Well, I'm not saying
Sometimes you can do, but
you can do it. I don't want to dismiss it as it's not going to be effective. I'm just saying there are lots of different ways that you can go about turning an interaction into a client opportunity.
yeah, that's so true. And what you said about people like talk about themselves and they like talk about work. One thing I've noticed too is that people love to talk about their families. So I'm a financial advisor, right? And sometimes when you're talking about like things like estate planning or what are you going to do in retirement, people may not tune in as much. But when you start talking about, oh, your kids, who's going to be there for them if anything happens? Yeah, they care, like guardianship documents and stuff. Let's do it. Let's do it. So yeah, people have like, if you're just trying to help someone, it's not really like you're selling, you're just genuinely trying to be helpful.
That's right.
Last 2 questions. One, what is the American dream to you? What do you think it means to you?
I guess I hate to say it doesn't really, those words don't mean anything to me. They just don't. The way I exist in life is, people ask me what motivates me. And for me, I'm curious as to what I am capable of. So I'm constantly pushing myself, right? Whether that's, physically, whether that's with work, whether that's in my personal relationships. My goal is to be the best person I can be. And everything else will sort itself out. I don't really do things to live an American dream or some concept of an American dream. I'm really focused on my journey and whether I am achieving my potential as I go through life. And that again goes in terms of how I am as a husband, how I am as a father, how I am with my business, and how I am in terms of just taking care of myself. And along the way, I guess it has led to me creating what some might conceive as kind of an American dream, to the extent that such a thing exists in this day and age. But it's, for me, that's not the goal, and that's not something I think about. It is kind of a byproduct of kind of good habits developed pursuing this other thing, which is how can I be the best version of myself that I can be?
I think that makes sense. And I think that in a roundabout way, it is the American dream to be able to live up to your full potential.
There you go.
Yeah. And that this is one of the few countries where people are free to do that.
Thank you so much for watching. I really, really hope you found that helpful and inspiring. Don't forget to check out the links below. Like, subscribe, share with anyone else you think would find this helpful. And yeah, see you in the next episode. Bye.